Well, hello and a warm welcome back to another video. The weather hasn't been particularly good of late, so I thought while I had a few minutes I wanted to do another video looking at a make of boat that I like and that I've owned and that I still think is certainly worth a look if you're looking for a relatively older, cheaper GRP boat to get started into boating. This is in the UK, obviously, and that make that I'm going to have a look at today is Norman Cruisers. And Norman Cruisers, it seems as if they were started off by a chap in the late 1950s. I think, like a lot of these boating firms, he started it off very much. He started virtually making one-off dinghies, virtually to order, and then would sell those, and slowly the business grew. And the area that I'm mainly going to look at is by the time we get sort of to the very late 60s and on into the 70s and towards the end of the 70s. I think Norman Cruisers, in my view, built some very good boats, and I'll come on to the boats that I've owned a bit later on. But as I say, their height of popularity was in that late 60s on to the mid 70s period. I didn't realise by that time Norman Cruisers, they had various factories. They were always built in the Oldham area of Lancashire in the UK, but they had several factories. One was the boat laying up factory where the boats were laid up and constructed, and then they had a factory that built boat windscreens, and they sold windscreens to other boat manufacturers as well as making their own boat windscreens. And they also had a canopy and like a soft furnishings factory where they built obviously canopies for their own boats and soft furnishings, and they also sold these to other boat manufacturers. I didn't know that. And I think around about this time, if we look say around about 1971 period, Norman Cruisers was employing around about 200 people in the Oldham area, so it's got quite a sizable little company by them. And something else I didn't realise in this period as well, some 65% of their output was also exported, going to Holland, I think, where the Norman range was sold as interboats, Germany, Sweden, in fact all over Europe. There is an excellent website out there if you want to read more, learn more about Norman cruisers and boats. It's got a lot of useful information regarding the boats, and a lot of people, there's a Norman boat register there, and there's a lot of useful information if you are thinking of buying one of these and then doing some work on it. There's a lot of helpful advice there on the history of the company, and that's the Norman Boat Appreciation Society. I will put a link to that in the description below because it's certainly worth having a look at. And I certainly think, particularly if you're interested in having a look at Normans and the range they did, because I'm not going to, I'm sure it'd be impossible for me to talk about the whole range. I'm not going to here, it would be impossible because they built a lot of boats over many years again. So basically, why do I like Norman boats? Well, as I've said in other videos, I've always been around boats. I've loved boats ever since I was 5. My uncle worked at a marina where they had a small hire fleet of Freeman boats, and I got very much involved in them. I used to go with my uncle and help him, and probably was more of a hindrance, but I used to like to think I was helping him. And so I've always been around boats. And later on in my sort of, when I started working and got my own money, and I sort of very much went into I started buying Avon inflatable sports boats with big, quite biggish Yamaha outboard motors, and would use them on the east coast of the UK, out of places like Blakeney and Wells Next to Sea and all those places. Even dabbled in the art of water skiing, or trying to do it, and had fun, you know, tearing about in these Avon inflatable boats offshore. But you know, you soon get tired of that and you think this is costly, and that was very seasonal, even more seasonal than, you know, normal boating. You know, you could only do it at certain days when the conditions were right. And obviously, so I thought there's got to be more to boating than this. And so I started looking around and at what I could afford. And I was able to part exchange my last big Avon inflatable sports boat and outboard and trailer. I was able to part exchange that without too much monetary addition. I had to put some money towards it, but I was able to part exchange for a Norman 20. And obviously I had that on a permanent mooring on the river close to home here. And obviously that opened up a complete new aspect of boating to me. You know, I was able to go off and explore. You could stop overnight, you could go the weekend, you could even manage a week on that little boat. And I really loved and adored that little Norman 20. It was a super boat. I think, you know, probably the Norman 20 was one of the most popular models that Norman boats ever built. You know, looking at their brochures, as I've looked back, I've got some old brochures of Norman boats, and they even gave it a, you know, an offshore capability with a better outboard motor, as like an offshore little day fishing boat type thing. But primarily there were many used on the inland waterways. It was a 610, it was narrow beam, so it would go through the narrow locks. And I really loved that boat, and as I say, it got me totally hooked on inland boating. And obviously throughout this video I'll intersperse this with pictures and some of the old brochures, and put some pictures of my Normans that I had over the years. So yeah, that was really my introduction to boating, and why I've always rated, you know, Norman boats. I mean, my Norman 20 was it seemed very well laid up. It was nicely fitted out inside. Obviously that had an outboard motor, that didn't have an inboard engine. I believe some of the 20s came, there were possibilities of having an inboard in that, but the vast majority that were sold were outboard motor versions. That obviously at key period, sort of, as I say, from the early 1970s to the late 1970s, that's when, you know, all smaller inland glass fibre boats were at the height of their popularity and production. And there were certainly, it's quite surprising when you look, I've got some of the, I've got most of the Waterways World, a UK inland boating magazine, and I've got virtually all of everyone that was ever issued, right from the first one that was issued in spring 1972, and I've got most of them in the lovely bound folders. But when you look through these, you know, you can really see there was no two ways about it. Like I did, everyone then really, unless you'd got a vast sum of money to spend, the way you went into leisure boating, which was holidays, weekends and leisure time, was you bought a cheap glass fibre boat on the UK rivers and canals, and you sort of then, if you wanted to, if you liked it and enjoyed it, you progressed onwards. You traded it up and got something a bit better or bigger, and so on and so on. And maybe eventually, if it was your ultimate ambition, you aspired to a narrowboat or a bigger cruiser, whatever. And as I say, I have the, I'm looking now at the, it's the January edition. I'll put that up better. It's the January 1973 edition of Waterways World, and they did an interesting article on all of the glass fibre boats that were available in those days, that were suitable for canal and river use, or inland waterways in the UK. And interestingly enough, Norman Cruisers Limited of Universal Works, Grains Road, Shore, Oldham, Lancashire, in those days they had the Norman 18, the Norman 20, the Norman 23 and the Norman 32. Price wise, the Norman 18 was £575, the Norman 20 was £865, the Norman 23 was £1,385, and the bigger 32 was £2,285. I certainly think the first three of those, they would have virtually all been outboard powered craft. You know, you'd had to buy an outboard motor separately. Like I said, there was possibilities with the Norman 20 and certainly the 32, the Norman 32, the bigger version. That was an aft cabin. You know, it got sort of a centre cockpit where you helmed the boat from, and then had quite a big aft cabin as well as the front cabin. That came with the possibilities of either a water motor petrol, I believe, and even a BMC. I have seen them advertised with BMC diesels. So there were possibilities there. But the vast majority of people buying these cheaper, like the Norman Cruiser range, were buying them with outboard motors because it was far cheaper to do that. Coming on to looking at the distributors for Norman Cruisers in those days, most of the Norman range of boats was sold through a company called Ladyline Limited. So yes, Ladyline had many outlets all over the country, and they were basically sole distributors of the Norman range, and most of the outlets would have a showroom where you could view various models of these Norman 20s, 23s, 32s even in a showroom, brand new, and you could, you know, wander about them, have a look in them, sit on them. And the nearest Ladyline outlet to where I was based was on the canal at Braunston, and there was a Ladyline there which later was all redeveloped and came now is Braunston Marina. They were very good. They would do a whole package. You know, they would obviously they bought outboard motors in bulk, so they could do you a really good deal on an outboard motor to marry up to the boat. They would fit the outboard motor on and do you chandlery. They always had a good range of chandlery shops at their outlets. And they would sell you the whole package, ropes, fenders. It would often come like that. You know, you would have everything to set off, basically. You know, most people buying these boats, new then anyway, were buying a boat for the first time or upgrading, obviously. So, and even if you upgraded, you more than likely had upgraded the engine, and so, you know, you virtually started again. And as I think Norman boats were tremendous and really good value. They always seem well put together, well laminated, the construction of them, and it's testament to the fact that here we are, some 45, even 50 years moved on, and here I am still saying that there's plenty of Norman boats out there, as can be seen certainly on this Norman Boat Appreciation Society web page and their Web Society page. So yeah, I would certainly, you know, don't discount them, even for the age. Have a look. As I say, they did many models. Coming on a little bit, we looked at what models were available in 1973 there in that Waterways world. By early 1974, they introduced the Norman 27, which was there again was a it had a cockpit midway and had a half cabin and then a front cabin and a cockpit sort of in the middle with a cockpit hood. a framed hood. So it was an aft cockpit style boat, a bit like the Viking 27 that you see a lot about today, which sort of really, I'm not going to say copied the Norman, but you know, was very similar in style. And so yes, and that seemed a tremendously popular boat in its day. And they also did a smaller version, an aft cockpit or an aft cabin version of the Norman 20, which was called the Norman Conquest, a little 20-foot boat with a central cockpit and a little aft cabin at the back and a front cabin. So there was lots of variants that they did on, you know, the stock of their boats. And as I say, I found them immensely, you know, really always well designed, pleasing to look at, to the eye, which, you know, in a glass fibre boat isn't important. It's the practicalities of it all, I know. But you want to know, you know, it was nice to have a boat that looked well and looked good on the water, and Normans always did, in my view, I feel. Moving the story on quickly, because this is all starting to, you know, take too long, really, I feel. But moving the story on to the late 70s, sadly, the demise of Norman boats, it seems, was very much in that horrible time in the late 70s, 1979, in the winter of discontent. I think production ceased then for a short time, but it has to be, there's several factors you have to look at here as well. Around that time as well, the River Great Ouse was in Bedfordshire and on into Cambridgeshire, but in the Bedfordshire area, the River Great Ouse was made navigable right again to Bedford. I think prior to about 1978, navigation ceased at a place called Great Barford, quite a few miles, you know, the other side of Bedford. And several new locks were built or reconstructed. The locks were there, I still believe, and they were just reconstructed. And I think one was totally rebuilt. And so by 1978, the river, you could navigate the River Great Ouse right into Bedford. There was a company in Bedford that owned a garage on the Goldington Road. It was called Harry Kitchener Garage, and it was a Datsun dealer. And they had been selling quite a few smaller boats off the garage forecourt area, and they also had some bits and pieces of chandlery. Now they took it on in the late 70s, and looking into the early 80s, they decided to obviously invest, and they built had the new Priory Marina in Bedford built. And at that time they had the marina basin built, so you could get access out onto the river with many moorings there, and that's still there today. Kitcheners don't own it anymore. I don't know quite who owns Priory Marina. I will have a look. I'll look that up now. And they also had a showroom built, and a chandlery shop, and a workshop. It was a super, you know, place. It was in Barker's Lane, down by the river. And I think that the like Marina Basin had been an old gravel pit, to be fair, and that was just linked into the river. So obviously, when that opened, Kitcheners started looking for new boats to sell. And by this time, let's say we're into 1980 now, there weren't that many compared with perhaps sort of 10 years earlier. You know, the newer glass fibre boats were suitable for river and that were affordable for, you know, people, were getting, you know, fewer and fewer on the ground. And so somehow Harry Kitchener Marine did a tie-up deal with Norman Boats, and production started again in 1980. And I have got one of the, there we go, I'll put this up in better so you can see it. I've got one of the later Harry Kitchener Marine Norman, they actually changed the Norman 23, it became a 24. And the style of it was much the same. It had a navy boot topping and some wooden, you know, and strafing there. And but they put that back into production, and they also brought the Norman 27 back as well. and Harry Kitchener Marine were sole concessionaires in that period for Norman boats, and I think that was they started around about 1980. So Norman's kept going and were sort of reinvigorated a bit with it. And both these models, I think they kept the Norman 20 in production as well. So there was the Norman 20, the 24 and the 27, and the 24 and 27 were even available in the Kitchener years with a Volvo MD sail drive diesel engine if you wanted to, and that made the price quite a bit dearer. They were still available in outboard motor versions that most people invested in, because I did put a lot of money on to have the diesel inboard. But it was a super boat, particularly the 24 with the MD. I think it was like almost fitted in like a tunnel drive at the back, this little MD Volvo diesel engine. So that was very clever and a nice idea. And in fact, I liked Norman boats so much. I'd had the Norman 20, as I talked earlier, that I actually traded that in at Kitchener Marine, Harry Kitchener's, and bought a brand new Norman 27 around this time. I think that was 1981. And that was a super boat, and I took that everywhere. It, went right down the Nene, right round the Ouse, the Cam, the Wissey, the Lark, the Little Ouse, middle level, and then I went further afield on it. If I hadn't got time and only got 2 weeks holiday in those days, obviously we're working, I'd have it trailered to a location, the Thames or another river, or even we took it on parts of the canal as well, and it was a super boat. I loved the later built Norman 27 that was bought through Kitchener's. Kitchener's were always very good again. They'd always, look at doing part exchange deals, and really competitive. In fact, strangely enough, this guy here on the front of the brochure, you'll see that. But so I'll put this up in a bigger photo form. He was a guy called Rob Burrows, and his family were involved in the director's side of Kitchener's, but Rob was chief salesman, and Rob Burrows was one of those guys that could sell you anything that floated, basically, and he'd always do some fantastic deals, and want to sell you a boat, and enjoyed selling boats, and so that's my brief little look at Norman boats and why I like them so much and have, great admiration for them. And they brought me great pleasure and took me to many places that I wouldn't have got to, had I not, invested in that little Norman 20 all those years ago. So certainly worth a look still, even today, even the age they are. And like I've said in other videos, if you're not sure when you're looking at an old boat, do get some, professional help, even if you, have to pay out and have a hull survey. I mean, I think most of it, you can look round yourself to a point. I would certainly, while I was looking at any of these older outboard powered GRP boats, and this goes for any make, I would certainly closely inspect the transom area where the outboard motor bracket's onto, because that can be a stress point. But like I say, if you're unsure, seek professional help. It doesn't necessarily cost as much as you think, and in the long run it might save you a lot of money, because you might end up not buying the boat because it had a major problem. So it's always worth thinking about. I'm not going to recommend anybody to do, it's very much your decision on that, but obviously the older boats get, the more problems they do, suffer from. But that shouldn't put you off looking or having a go or even buying one, or even, wanting to sort of, do some work or even renovate a Norman boat, for instance. A guy a couple of moorings away from me bought a very tatty 23, and over a period of 2 years he made it into a truly splendid boat. You know, it was a real eye catcher by the time he'd done. One winter he moved it off the water and put it into a barn and spent a lot of time and energy. I'm not going to say much about money, it was more about time he spent on that, and obviously it did cost, you know, money to a point, but it was really the time he spent on it, and it made an ideal. It was his starter boat, and that was a Norman 23. So they are still out there, if you know, and certainly worth a look. But thanks again for watching. Thank you all for your super comments, and please do like, subscribe, whatever. As always, and if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them. Although I don't certainly profess to know everything about boats, because I certainly don't. But yeah, I just felt, you know, I wanted to make this little video because Norman boats brought me great pleasure when I was starting off boating. So there we go. Thanks as always for watching, and do come back for a future video, and bye for now.